"You are so romantic." Now it means that the person is deeply in love, or that love moves the action of this person. But it also refers to Romanticism, a literary and artistic movement from 19th century Europe. Originally I was going to make a video about Les Miserables, but that was going to be too long. So I decided to divide the topic into several episodes. This will be the first one, in which we will explore the movement to which the book belongs. Let's see. Nowadays, when we heard the word romantic, we think of someone who is deeply in love. In the 19th century, it was a reference to a cultural movement known as Romanticism. Apparently, the term comes from the French word roman, which means novel, so romantic would mean related to the novel. From literature, the term moved into painting, music, politics, historiography, in summary, a whole cultural movement. But what does it mean? For me, the essence of Romanticism is the intensity of emotions. If there is love, it's the deepest of love. If there is grief, it's a soul-consuming grief. If there was madness, it was the most immense madness. Examples of this are the love between Marius and Cosette in Les Miserables, the act of grief from Quasimodo at the end of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, or the several episodes of madness from Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. And this is just literature. Emotions are taken to the extreme. Instead of the logical thinking that was so common in Neoclassicism, the movement prior to Romanticism, romantic characters are driven by their feelings. And they take actions that you wouldn't normally take because they don't seem reasonable or logical. Everything is more dramatic and intense. Romanticism also focuses on heroic characters that follow their own path, their own norms. During the French Revolution, Napoleon was the hero of the people, but then he became a disappointment, maybe because he crowned himself emperor. I think that could be a disappointment for many people. So romantic authors separated themselves from this idea that a hero had to uphold social order and instead focus on characters that were rejected by society and that they themselves rejected society. Such are the cases of Edmond Dantes from The Count of Monte Cristo, Jean Valjean from Les Miserables, Victor Frankenstein from Frankenstein, Hester Prynne from The Scarlet Letter, or Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, just to name a few. Romanticism also made its way into politics, because sometimes authors would talk about the idea of what their nation is or what it means to them, thus fueling nationalism. Romanticism in itself wasn't nationalist, but books would often present a romantic, positive, and even heroic view of their country, and that paved the way for nationalism. Consider Victor Hugo's novel Our Lady of Paris, better known in English as The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Hugo wrote the book because Notre Dame Cathedral was falling into disrepair, and he wanted Parisian authorities to take action and give maintenance to the temple. It was so effective that Parisian and French people took pride in their heritage and their history, so much so that nowadays Notre Dame is a national symbol. For me, that's the amazing thing about literature, the effect and the power it has for changing people's mind. But enough about literature, let's talk about paintings. The first point that we mentioned was the intensity of emotions, and this is better represented in this painting by a non-romantic artist. Even though Gustave Courbet fits better on a different movement, this self-portrait, known as The Desperate Man, Les Désespérés, shows a lot of emotions. But if we have to talk about purely romantic painters, then probably one of the most dramatic examples is The Raft of the Medusa by Theodore Géricault. And here we have several emotions: hope, despair, boredom, and those who are already dead. It depicts the story of a shipwreck from 1816 whose survivors and their stories shook European society. Another super famous romantic painting is Liberty Leading the People by Eugène Delacroix. A lot of people think that this painting represents the French Revolution from 1789, but it actually depicts a scene from the July Revolution from 1830. So it is a French Revolution, not the French Revolution. I think this artwork can help us understand one aspect of romantic paintings. We say that Romanticism is dramatic, but how do we know this? One way is lighting. In a theater, you don't have natural light, so you can illuminate the scene however you want. You can use one candle, or you can use several spotlights. When it comes to painting, you can recreate natural light, which is more common of Neoclassicism, or create more dramatic lighting by having some characters directly under the spotlight or hidden away under the shadows. Another idea that connects Romanticism with drama is the composition. In art, composition means the position of the characters, the poses of the characters, and the lines that they create. Neoclassic artwork is more rigid and straight and uses architectural elements to create those lines. Take, for example, this set. If I'm doing my work correctly by putting the camera on the right place, all of these lines should be parallel or perpendicular to the frame of the screen. Romantic painters, on the other hand, use the characters and the movements to set these lines, and the elements in the background are not as relevant. Another difference between Romanticism and Neoclassicism is the inspiration for their work. Neoclassic painters would reference Greece and Rome, whereas Romantic artists would use folktale, the medieval times, or the Middle East as inspiration. The same could be said for literature, where we can find the tales by the Brother Grimms, the medieval Hunchback from Victor Hugo, or the poem about Kublai Khan by Samuel Coleridge. Romanticism also focused heavily on nature. One of the masterpieces from the movement is The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog by Caspar David Friedrich. The immensity of nature is fundamental in this painting. It creates an emotion of belittling, of feeling small. We can find examples of this in literature in the Bronte sisters with Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre. There is one thing where I have to correct myself. At the beginning of the video, I said that Romanticism was a literary and artistic movement from 19th century Europe. But it was more than that. It wasn't just literature and art. There was also romantic music, primarily by Beethoven. But I'm not so much of an expert in music. And we briefly mentioned how it influenced politics, conservationism, and the general thinking of people. Furthermore, the movement is not limited to the 19th century. It actually originated in Germany in the late 18th century. And even though it was more present and influential in European countries like Germany, France, and England, Romanticism reached places like Russia, South America, or the United States. Herman Melville's Moby Dick, Emily Dickinson's poetry, or Edgar Allan Poe's tales are all prime examples of American Romanticism. Romanticism touched so many aspects and so many countries that it's no wonder why it was so influential. And for historians, it's important not only because it saved a cathedral, which is pretty amazing, but because it changed the perception people had for the Middle Ages. Romantic authors and artists were determined on making the Middle Ages more interesting and positive and, well, romantic, instead of just painting them as the Dark Ages. And that changed historiography, the way that we write history. Art and literature change history. On the next video, we're going to dive in more into one of the many masterpieces from Romanticism, Les Miserables. If you want to receive a notification when I upload that video, click subscribe and hit the bell icon. I've been Ernesto Vergara, thank you so much for watching. See you next time, bye bye, ciao ciao. Bye.